Welcome to another tutorial. Today I want to show you how to do a motion blur. I got this picture from a student and I was kind of excited because it's a perfect example for this. You'll see that we've already done an adjustment here. This is an adjustment layer. You can turn this on and turn this off. So what this is here, and I'm not going to completely explain adjustment layers, but you can see how there's this blacked area. Black means block. Anywhere that it's white, the adjustment applies to. So in other words, we did a brightness adjustment, and I can click on this to see it. We brightened up certain areas. So we could use these little white areas to specifically kind of paint in where we wanted to brighten up the people. We're going to do a similar kind of layer mask for this next thing. The first thing I need to do though is make a new layer via copy, which is simply Command J or Control J for PC people, but it's also up here, new. Sorry, I always do it via the shortcut key, so it's always hard for me to find this. So new layer via copy. There it is. So layer, new, layer via copy. All that does is it makes an extra version of the bikers here. I'm going to drag this on top for now. And I know that's covering up my adjustment, but that's okay because we're going to do a motion blur and then block out the areas where the bikers are. So I'm going to go up to filter and I'm going to do a blur. I want to do a motion blur. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to spread this out, and it's showing me a preview so I can decide how much I want to do the motion blur. I think that's good. Okay. So now I've got this layer motion blurred. What I want to do now is add a layer mask. So right down here, I've got this little guy here. That when I clicked on this, do you see how that added this little extra white thumbnail? What that is, it's a layer mask. So right now, since everything is white, the motion blur is affecting the entire image. What I want to do is actually hide this layer and go back to my background because I want to select the bikers and then I want to black out or block the areas where the cyclists are. So right over here, I'm just going to switch so that I'm using black. I guess I didn't need to do that yet, but that's okay. Now I'm going to take my quick selection tool. I want to make sure it's on plus, and I'm going to select the bikers. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to go through his arm, grab the back of him, and we just want to sort of get this. We don't need it to be perfect. All right, now I'll do this guy. I went to the negative now and I'm just trying to get some of these little areas. It can be tricky to do this really precise. Okay, I'm gonna call that good enough. Okay, so now that I have the bikers selected, I'm gonna go back to my motion blur layer. And what I did is this just makes it easier for me to kind of refine where I am. So now I want to go in with my brush tool. I want to make sure I'm on black. Black means block. You want to make sure you're on the layer mask. This is saying right now, since everything is white, the motion blur is showing on the entire layer. If I go with the brush tool, and I'm going to make this a nice big round brush. Once again, the quick selection tool, when you have something selected, you can only do things to the selected area. So as I paint down, you can see how I can only paint, and I probably could have used a bigger brush, but that's okay. I can only paint in the areas where the biker is, where it's selected. You can see I didn't perfectly select the biker, but I can refine this from here. So once again, coloring him in. All right, okay. I'm gonna go ahead and deselect, and I'm gonna go back to my Wacom tablet so I can draw here with my pen. I also wanna make sure, I wanna have like kind of a nice soft edge to where I'm painting. So I'm switching to my soft edged brush so that I can just paint. So there's some spots that I can tell I missed, so I'm just going over those. Got his leg here. Got some of his hand that I need to get. Just painting on this black. Once again, what I'm doing is I'm blocking out the motion blur. So I'm saying I don't want the motion blur to be showing where these riders are. And you can play quite a bit with the size of your brush and the like how much you soften the edge as far as how you capture this effect. So up to you. Okay, I'm going to go back. So now there's areas that you can see how I got rid of this motion blur here, but I didn't want to. So now I can switch to white and put that motion blur back. So same thing in here. Now, old school way of doing this, people would make a motion blur layer and then they would erase the parts of the motion blur layer that they didn't want it to show. The problem with doing that is that if you erase too much, you can't really edit your work. Whereas doing it this way, you can, if you accidentally erase a little too much, or I should say block a little too much, you can go back and tweak your selection, which is why I really like using it or doing this tool for this particular technique. I'm going to go in along the back of him and just check that. And then there's this little spot in here. And I'm going to switch to black again. I feel like his leg has got a little bit of blur on it that I didn't want to get. And then once again, if you want to play with the size, you could make this size a little bigger, and that would soften up where that edge goes. Soften up where the blur starts and ends. I'm going to go back to the edge of him. You can see how having this Wacom tablet is helpful for this particular tool. You could do this with a mouse for sure, but it is easier. And for those of you who don't know, a Wacom tablet is simply a pen-operated mouse. So it allows you to just, instead of moving your mouse around, I'm just moving right now. It looks like a pen, but it's controlling where the scrolling is occurring. Okay, so now I have my picture. I'm just going to zoom out a little bit so you can see. Now I have my motion blurred riders. So this is what it looks like without the motion blur. This is what it looks like with the motion blur. You can see right in here how if you look at this, you can see how I can see the black and white kind of outlines of the riders because I'm blocking where these cyclists were. So once again, without the motion blur and with the motion blur. So I've got my layer with the motion blur. It is blocking those pixels. You could paste another picture on here and block parts of a different image. It doesn't have to be the same image, but that's what these little masking layers are. These masks can be used to block areas of an adjustment or block areas of pixels. So like this, these motion blur pixels. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and save this. Just go File, Save. The reason I'm making sure I keep it as a PSD is, let's say you print this and decide you want to do some sort of edit, you missed a little spot. Having this already here makes it easier for you. If you only save it as a JPEG, if you want to work on it later, oops, it's still saving the Photoshop file. If you want to work on it later and you only have it as a JPEG, you don't have this motion blur already isolated, so it's just takes more work. So make sure you keep the Photoshop version on something like this, and then go ahead and save it as a JPEG. I'm just going to move my screen up so you can see what I'm doing. So I've got my bikers, JPEG, and I'm not worried about calling it copy since this is a JPEG versus the other one was bikers. All right, go ahead and save. And I just had it on maximum, and that was it. Once again, here are my bikers. I've got my motion blur background. This was an adjustment layer. I really like how this looks with the motion blur. I think it adds a lot to the image. Hopefully this helped you. Have fun photoshopping.